Okay, happy Tuesday. And again, thank you so much for joining us for Racial Wealth Equity, Closing the Gaps in Data. This webinar is presented by the Black Wealth Data Center. So just a few housekeeping tips. So this webinar will be recorded and emailed to you all within a week from today. All of our webinar attendees are muted to ensure sound quality, but please, please, please interact with each other by using the chat and submit your questions as the presentation goes on. There will be 2 Q&A sessions today, so you'll have ample time to feel heard and have your questions answered. So please use the questions box in your control panel anytime to reach out to us and submit your questions for those sessions. And if you experience any technical difficulties, email gotomeeting@prosperitynow.org. We want you to get the most out of today's webinar, so we encourage you to join from a quiet place so you can really get comfortable and soak up all the great knowledge and content that we have here today. Grab a coffee or a snack to settle in, and also engage with us. Again, use the questions box to leave questions and comments as you listen. And please be sure to tag us at Black Wealth Data on Twitter. Interact with us there so that we can hear your tweets and hear you over there as well, and reflect on ways to apply what you learned today in your own work. So without further ado, I am going to pass things over to Natalie Evans-Harris, the Executive Director of the Black Wealth Data Center.
Greetings, everyone. So excited to be here for this conversation. As Olivia said, my name is Natalie Evans-Harris, and I'll be facilitating a conversation with everyone today where we'll get to dive into a local perspective of disaggregated data collection and gaps with my colleague Lamar Gardier of the Data Center. After that, we'll have the opportunity to explore ways that you and others are able to fill some of those data gaps with a brief demo of our platform that we launched as the Black Wealth Data Center in September 22. But why are we here doing this? Why are we talking about data as it relates to racial wealth equity? Well, as you can see from this chart, it's because people and organizations have wanted to address racial wealth equity for decades, centuries. And there's data out there available to do it, but there's a long line between accessing that data, using that data to draw meaningful conclusions. I've spent 20 years in this space. And as executive director of the Black Wealth Data Center, similar to the work I've done in the past with the federal government, on Capitol Hill, under the Obama administration, and most recently with the Biden administration, we understand that if we want to address those systemic barriers, we need the data in a way that we can use it to solve those problems. Go ahead to the next slide, Olivia. So here's what we recognize. There's lots of data out there that can help us solve those problems. But it's all in different places, it's all in different platforms. So when we launched our platform in September 2022, incubated by Prosperity Now and supported by Bloomberg Philanthropies, what we sought to do was aggregate this data from a local, state, and national level and provide visualizations at the zip code and county level to help you focus on the factors that impact wealth accumulation and look at them by race, gender, and oftentimes education if the data is there. Go ahead to the next slide. And so what we did was we launched the Racial Wealth Equity Database. And you'll learn more about that over the demo that our lead data scientist, Amia Min, will demonstrate after this conversation with Lamar. I look forward to hearing from you, and I look forward to having this discussion with Lamar. The Data Center is the most trusted resource for data about Southeast Louisiana. Go ahead to the next slide. Lamar Gardier is Executive Director. He is responsible for guiding the Data Center's mission of democratizing data into realistic action, ensuring quality standards and the ongoing impact of the organization. In addition, he is responsible for leading the data center's ongoing efforts to transform local culture to one that embraces data as an intrinsic component of sound decision making. Lamar joined the data center after 6 years with the City of New Orleans Office of Information Technology and Innovation, most recently as the Chief Information Officer. Lamar is nationally recognized for his work implementing and developing the open data policy for the City of New Orleans. I'm thrilled to share here for the first time that the data center will be receiving a grant in partnership with the BWDC and the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership to support its local data collection. You'll hear more about that grant in the coming days as the announcement is made. This slide is up before we jump into the conversation with Lamar, because this is our charge. And similar to what you heard about the data center and working out of New Orleans, we're looking to use data to fuel data-driven solutions, to increase access to the data that you all need on this call, and to ultimately improve the quality of data that's out there. So we're hoping through this conversation and this demo and the questions we have later that we'll be able to think more about how data can influence and impact the way that we talk about and the way that we measure wealth, not only in the Black community, but in all communities. Welcome to the conversation, Lamar, and thank you for taking time with us.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I appreciate being here very much, the invitation from the Blackwell Data Center and Prosperity Now. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So let's dive in. Let's start with collecting and disaggregating data by race at the local level. What are the conditions in New Orleans?
Oh, thank you for that question, Natalie. That's an interesting question. You know, because of Hurricane Katrina and other circumstances afterwards, New Orleans' data ecosystem is actually fairly mature. The data center has been operating here since about 1997, and together we've improved data capacity to the point where, you know, most of us in our community, regardless of the political spectrum that you're on, you've seen and heard about the racial disparities that exist here. You've been told about, we've talked about the relationship that it has to the outcomes and the broader prosperity of the city and its economy and things like that. So in terms of data collection, we've done pretty good at that, right? Now, what we need at this point is the ability to go deeper, right? To really understand what this data is telling us, the specifics of how we would address it, the particular groups that we need to provide programming for, and at what level, and over how long, things like that, so that folks not only understand the problem, but understand the size of it and the specific action that needs to happen to solve it.
Thank you. And how does the data that you collect at the data center lead to action on the ground?
Yes, so we have become really good at understanding the conversations that are happening locally, listening to the ones that are happening without good data or just based on anecdotes and things like that, and then sewing good data and analysis into those conversations in an independent, neutral, non-biased way so that we stop arguing over the facts of a situation, right? Like, we should not be arguing about what Black median household income is versus white median household income. Here it is, here's the fact, let's stop talking about it. Let's start talking about solutions related to that. And we do that over and over again. We deliver our data specifically to decision makers, to community members, to business and government leaders, and we leverage media significantly in the local and national space to make sure that the pertinent data and analysis that we're producing makes it into the channels that folks are most used to consuming news and information through.
Now, I know that the data center, I'm going to go a little bit off topic, off the questions. And I know the data center, your mission is broader than racial wealth equity. Do you have examples of your experiences with data collection and using data to advance some of the topics around racial wealth equity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our charge is to identify any of the circumstances that would lead to broader prosperity in the New Orleans region. That can be things like understanding our economy and the relationship that water and disasters have to that economy and climate change has to that economy and things like that. But significantly, racial issues, racial disparities, differences by race, inequality. Those are some of the biggest factors that impact our prosperity locally. As a result, we focused in that area fairly significantly, helping people to understand both the data, circumstances, and systemic impacts associated with those factors. Um, Importantly, the Black wealth work that we're doing now is undergirded by a previous study that we did called the Prosperity Index, where we took a look at racial data from the civil rights era to now to understand whether or not Black folks in New Orleans had seen growth, had seen increases in economic opportunity and inclusion since the civil rights era. That report was illuminating in terms of understanding exactly how little the Black community has been able to participate in the economy, even as political participation has increased. From that work, and it was really broad, looking at many different sectors. From that work has grown this focus on wealth as a way of understanding the connectivity between economics, income, policies, behaviors, practices, and the poor outcomes that we see for communities of color at times.
Yeah, and that's so important to understand that wealth and talking about wealth really does span multiple topics and
Mhm.
multiple areas, not just about your income, but your employment and your assets and debts and education. And there's so many things that influence an individual's ability to accumulate wealth. And knowing that you've been working so hard and so long in this space, I'm looking forward to learning and picking your brain going forward. But where do we go from here? What would you like to see from organizations like ours and perhaps organizations represented on today's call in order to advance the state of racial wealth equity data?
Yeah. So when we start to do this work, and the work that we're doing now is specifically in partnership with the Urban League of Louisiana, who has taken on closing the racial wealth gap for Black and Hispanic and Latino folks in the Greater New Orleans region. They've taken that on as their generational work. And when we do that work, there is always this question of, well, how does it look in New Orleans? Okay, well then how does it look in Memphis? How does it look in Charlotte or Atlanta or Houston or all the normal cities that we and other folks try to compare themselves to? But the data center is regionally focused, right? And so one of the things that we can see from people on this call, and we're excited about the work that the Black Wealth Data Center is doing, but being able to provide that kind of information using the same methods, right, across multiple regions, multiple metro areas and cities and things like that, so that we are easily able to answer the question, New Orleans is compared to Houston or Dallas like this, right? Our wealth gap compared to Atlanta's wealth gap is shaped like this, right? And distribution is thus. And so those are the things that we'd like to see other organizations doing, really uniting around specific methodologies for calculating these things at the local level so that there can be good comparisons. Also really advancing the conversation around wealth, that it's not just about assets, as you just said, but that it is a good way to talk about some of our issues that we have around crime, or some of the issues that we have around educational attainment or health outcomes, housing affordability, things like that. Many of these things can be talked about in a fairly uniform way under the umbrella of the wealth gap. And if you can communicate a thing well in a very basic way, you can make change happen in it. So we'd love to see that kind of uniform messaging around the value of closing racial wealth gaps.
I don't know if you're intentionally staying away from that word standards, but it sounds like you're pushing us towards, maybe we need some standards, a framework around collection.
Frameworks, that's right, that's right.
I appreciate everything that we've talked about, and that's it for questions from me. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you would love to share with this audience?
Again, just really grateful for the opportunity to do this work in partnership with the Black Wealth Data Center and Prosperity Now. Looking forward to really digging into the racial wealth gap. We really want to understand the composition of that gap, right? Like a wealth calculation is an average. We want to know what's the distribution, like how On the folks who are on the lower end, how many folks are on the lower end? On the folks on the upper end, how many are on the upper end? And what's that difference in that stratification between black and white? If we focus our work with one group or another, what's the biggest change that we can see that would improve situations across the city? So, I just want to leave you all with that thought that, we're all looking to do work that changes real people's lives, right? Changes the trajectory of communities and improves cities, particularly cities that are majority people of color like New Orleans. So thank you, Natalie. I appreciate the conversation.
No worries. And I appreciate the conversation as well, because it's highlighting that it's a complex issue. And before we can really get to addressing some of those systemic barriers and get to those why it's so hard to scale impact, we have to be able to measure. We have to understand what is happening, and not to quote Jay-Z, but those numbers don't lie. And so how do we get those numbers into the hands of people that can start to answer that why in very data-driven ways?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I think the next step is I will ask Olivia to transition the slide. And do we have any questions? If we don't have any questions, I of course have additional questions I can ask Lamar, but we wanted to create space for the audience. While I wait to hear about any questions, welcome back, Lamar. Let's try, is it time to re-examine how we define Black wealth?
Happy to jump back in for questions. Yeah, our work here is specifically aimed at defining what wealth looks like. And I know that there are conversations about whether or not things like home ownership should really be a way that we are still considering building wealth. Some of those portions of the American dream, if you will, are harder to reach than they used to be. And so some folks are saying that's maybe not a good way to think about wealth anymore. Well, part of our work is to determine exactly how much these individual factors are contributing to wealth gaps, and then inform people that, like, hey, regardless of how we feel about it, these are the things that are causing the gaps in wealth, and that are making it hard for people of color to pass down resources and assets to future generations, to set them up for success in the ways that you might find in the lives of some of our white peers, right? And so, those are things that we should be thinking about as we're thinking about this definition. But again, expand our thought about wealth away from assets to being able to address some of the underlying concerns in our communities that really plague us.
That's really fair. It's almost a question of, did we ever have a consensus on the definition of wealth and the wealth gap? And do we have what we need now to begin to answer that question of what does actually impact and affect wealth accumulation across multiple communities? Olivia, do we have any questions from the audience? Do I read them? Okay, I see one question has come in. What are the hardest things to communicate about Black wealth at a local level, even if you have the data?
This is really where the rubber hits the road, right? When you start to talk about Black wealth, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And for the folks in the audience, not this audience necessarily, but in the conversation that you have in your communities, for the folks who are already able to accumulate wealth, for some of our residents who might be concerned that Black wealth means less wealth for them, part of what we need to communicate is that we aren't talking about taking anything away from one group and another. We are talking about there being a more even playing field, that there being economic opportunity and circumstances where we could all prosper, right? And so this is an additive conversation, not not one where we're trying to pick winners and losers, right? It's not the case that, you know, we're trying to cause one set of folks who've been winning before to somehow um, not be able to survive now at the expense. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about getting everybody up to the same level so we can all prosper, so we can all move forward. And that's a difficult conversation on either side of the aisle, right? Sometimes to really have and to really talk about how you do these kinds of things in a balanced way so that everybody is feeling whole and prosperous, and at the same time addressing those past inequities and the things that historically this country has done to disadvantage folks. All things have to be addressed, but it doesn't mean that anybody is going to be put in a situation where they're worse off, and that's a hard conversation to have sometimes.
Yeah, and I would add on to that that when you start talking about Black wealth, especially at the local level, organizations like mine and Lamar's, we can show you the data that shows how Black households are affected across certain topics, asset collection, assets and debts, or home ownership, and risk of environmental factors related to your home as a as a wealth tool. We can tell you the data around all of those things, but when you're really getting down to the local level, context matters.
Mhm.
Why is the experience in one zip code different from another zip code that's a neighboring zip code and another predominantly Black neighborhood? That context is often hard for data to be able to contribute. That's why it's so important for folks like those on this call that can provide that context of showing that even when you talk about Black wealth, Black people are not a monolith, and the experiences are go across a range of whys. And so the folks that work at that local level are the ones that can look at the data and say, mm, Black households have this experience in one zip code and this experience in another.
That's right.
But here are the factors at the local level that are contributing to that difference. And I know you've experienced that, Lamar, in New Orleans, especially as you've had to dive into that data specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there are folks in, you know, Black neighborhoods who are doing pretty well, right? And sometimes don't always respond as well, right, to the necessary changes that have to happen for folks in other neighborhoods to do better. Same thing with white neighborhoods, don't respond as well to uh, the things that have to happen good for Black neighborhoods, lower income Black neighborhoods. And so again, those are conversations that have to be had based on the data. We have to understand exactly how these things look and what needs to happen, who we need to lift up to have an economy that is prosperous, where everybody is moving forward. We've got good quality of life. We have to ask the hard questions and talk about the difficult things. We can't go over them. We really have to go through them.
Yeah. Another great question coming from the audience. This one's near and dear to my heart because I think data is only as powerful as the people that are putting it into action. So
Mhm.
one audience member is curious about ways in which community has engaged with the data center's efforts in New Orleans.
Oh yes, we engage with community all the time, right? It's one of the main things that we do, and that goes for the entire community, right? We've worked with government to put forth indicators about our demographics, our population that point to real weaknesses in New Orleans, and as a result, city government has created entirely new departments to focus on specific issues because the data center has highlighted certain problems before. We work with community organizers and community groups to make clear what the circumstances are in individual neighborhoods, right? Like what's the level of income, what's the level of education, what are the health outcomes in this particular neighborhood, things that help you advocate for what you need. You're in your community, you know how it looks, you know how it feels already, but the data helps you to describe that in a way that transcends any ideas around opinion, or you're just advocating because it's your favorite issue or something like that. No, here's the real data. Here are the real numbers, and it shows real differences between this neighborhood and that neighborhood. So we work with folks all the time in that way to help them advocate for their needs and to help apply for grants and things like that. data is a great tool for successfully applying for grants and motivating your particular issue area. That same thing goes true when you're trying to move legislation, right? Data helps in these sometimes difficult journeys to move positive legislation forward in our local and state governments. And data helps to make the case for one thing or another, particularly if that data clearly shows this would make our population better off in a systemic way. That's what we're looking for. And, those are some of the ways that we tend to work with community.
Amazing. Um, so one of the things at the center, that the Black Wealth Data Center has often been asked about is how much data is collected around ethnicity and how do we present that through the platform? Because BWDC is an aggregator of data, not a collector of data, we can only present what has been collected by others. So you won't see a lot of ethnicity on our platform. We would love to work at the local level to help improve those standards and have ethnicity be a part of the standard way data is collected around racial wealth. How have you worked, or how detailed is your data capturing ethnicity, and how have you worked around that for New Orleans?
Yeah. So truthfully, our data is as specific as the census's data is around ethnicity. We are reliant on the same data sets that you and others are on for understanding that. I think the difference is that we get to focus specifically in this locale when there are small sample sizes that make it hard to identify certain ethnicities. We know to apply certain statistical methods that help to clarify groups that exist in one region or in one part of our region or another. And without on the ground context, it's hard to know that you're missing that population and you need to go in and magnify it. We try as best as we can, right? Particularly with the Hispanic community, to be clear that the term Hispanic is a catch-all for a ton of different nationalities and ethnicities, right? And so we make the case that not all people are the same in that group, right? They come with different cultures and backgrounds and beliefs and things like that. And so we try to disaggregate our data by the various ethnicities where available, so that we're fully understanding the experiences of folks across our region. And that's often why we aggregate up, right? We'll take smaller areas and aggregate up to the neighborhood level so that we can understand who's in that neighborhood. So again, we can help folks address those needs specifically.
Yeah. And then that's actually a good follow on to the next question around what are some specific solutions for closing the wealth gap, and how do we build coalitions to develop those solutions?
Yes, so this is the work that we're doing with the Urban League, trying to discover specific solutions for closing the wealth gap. The thinking right now is that we would try to address the wealth gap along three primary pillars: home ownership as the most common way that people hold wealth in America, salaries and wages as the most accessible way to build wealth, right? Anybody who works earns a wage. And entrepreneurship, right, which is potentially the fastest way to build wealth if you have a successful business. And our effort has been to understand each of those issues very, very deeply and their specific contributions to the wealth gap, right? Like, for example, one of the differences relating to home ownership is the valuation of Black-owned houses versus white-owned houses, right? White-owned houses obviously appraised for much more than the Black-owned houses, and that creates a wealth disparity that really matters if you're trying to use your house for leverage or for equity to survive a medical incident, or even if you're going to pass it down to future generations, or you want to pull equity out to start a business. That really matters, that my house is worth less than my white peers, right? And so improving or increasing the network of appraisers such that they better understand how to evaluate the value of Black-owned homes is one of the things that we think is going to be important here as we continue to study this. Obviously, policies that lift people above the poverty level during the course of their education, so making sure that children are not in poverty as they're being educated, is an important policy to make sure that their education isn't interrupted by the difficulties that poverty presents. Those kinds of policies would be, good long term to change the trajectory of wealth. On and on, many different options here in terms of entrepreneurship. Why are there so many? There are many businesses in New Orleans that don't have employees, right? They're sole proprietor, single single owner, no employer businesses. Why is that the case here, and how do we grow those individual businesses, and how does that relate to the gig economy and the relationship of those kinds of businesses to the relatively low wages that are paid here in New Orleans, right? And so ecosystem supports that make it possible for those businesses to blossom, to grow, to hire folks are the kinds of policies that we're looking for that would be supportive of closing the racial wealth gap.
Thank you. And that really does highlight the importance of partnerships in doing this. Data alone can't solve the problems. Data alone can't answer the questions. What it does is illuminate information to help you understand the whys and develop those types of policy and program solutions that you're able to do with like the National Urban League or the Urban League of New Orleans. And so I'll let that be the final point before we move over to Ami, that the work that you do and the work that we're doing and plan to continue doing, it relies on partnerships, and it relies on our ability to work with those that can put the context and help us ideate around the solutions to help actually address and advance Black wealth equity and racial wealth equity overall. So thank you so much for your time, Lamar, and going along with all of the questions from the audience. Look forward to bringing you back up after the demo with Ami, and we'll share our closing thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie.
Thank you. All right, guys, keep the questions coming throughout the demo. I'm going to turn it over to Ami Amin, our lead data scientist, to lead a demo on how we're working to make racial wealth data more accessible and to acknowledge the gaps that exist. To be clear, as we stated in the last conversation, we want to be part of the solution to addressing these gaps. And we're keen to partner with you or anybody to make this work happen. And when I say we, I mean BWDC, but I'm sure I can speak for Lamar in saying that the data center is always looking for strong partnerships as well. Thank you, Ami, for doing this demo. And folks, keep the questions coming in the chat. We'll open up the floor again after her demo.
Thank you, Natalie. Hi, everyone. My name is Ami, and I'm the lead data scientist here at the Black Wealth Data Center. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So as Natalie said, I'm going to show you how you can use our platform to find relevant data and power your work. So currently we are on the Explore Data homepage. Someone from our team can drop the link to this in the chat. And the Explore Data pages provide users like you with an interface to access our racial wealth equity database. And so currently our Explore Data pages draw insight across 15 unique data sets to give you visuals that you can interact with, zoom into local geographic areas to answer some of the questions that Natalie and Lamar talked about. And to clarify, we do not collect data on our own, but we combine and aggregate existing data sets from federal agencies, local partners, and private partners in the future. The Explore Data pages, as you can see here, are organized by topic area, and the current topics are assets and debt, business ownership, education, employment, home ownership, and population demographics. So, and the cards here are here to provide you with some sample guiding questions that give you a sense of what information that can be found on each of these pages. So now we'll just take a quick look first at assets and debt to show you the types of things that you might find on these pages. So every topic page displays information at a national, state, and local level, and you can use this navigation bar at the top to jump to those sections. And there is also a data methodology page at the bottom of each of these topic areas. I'll jump to the state level for the sake of time. So this map that I've now jumped to shows median assets, debt, and net worth at the state level, and it can be filtered by race or ethnicity, education, and sex as well. And this data is coming from the survey of program participation that's published by the US Census Bureau. So each visual on our site, again, is designed to be really interactive and filterable. So let's start by looking at assets, median assets among Black households. So I'll filter to Black here. So one of the things that you might notice immediately is that there are 13 states that are grayed out because of insufficient data. And this is an example of one of the data gaps we're hoping to collaborate with researchers here on at the Black Wealth Data Center. So I'm going to dig deeper into the Midwest because that's where I'm from. So I'll click on Ohio, and then I will also use the control button to click on a few neighboring states as well. So as you can see, I have clicked on a couple of states, and you can see information on assets as you hover, and it also populates in the table below the map. Looking at this information, for example, I can see one thing that's interesting is that the Black households in Illinois have much lower median assets than neighboring Midwest states. We can also, again, filter by education. So I'll do bachelor's degree or higher here. And so again, you can see there's insufficient data in Indiana, but for the remaining states, what's interesting is Ohio, Black households in Ohio and Illinois have nearly double the median assets of Michigan. And so this is just one example of how you can interact with any of the maps on our site. Now I'm going to show you one example of our local maps, and I'm going to jump to our education page for this, and then go directly to local. So as you all know, the COVID-19 pandemic showed very clearly how disparities in broadband internet access can affect education, because children in households with broadband internet access could attend schools virtually without having to leave their homes. And so this map shows the percent of households with broadband internet subscriptions by race and ethnicity. And on all of our local maps, you can toggle between county and zip code level layers. And then you can select specific counties or specific zip codes using the filters on the right. I want to show you an additional feature here where you can filter any of our local maps by the metric of interest. So for example, here I might be interested in counties where the percentage of households with broadband internet access is below 80%, for example, and maybe household or counties where the Black population percentage is at least 20%. So as you can see, this has filtered the whole map to just counties that meet those restrictions. We could do the same thing at the zip code level. And so what I'm going to do now is kind of zoom in to where all of these counties are clustered. And then again, just like I did on the previous map, we can select certain counties, compare them, and it will populate the table below. And the table contains information on broadband internet subscription rates, broken out by race or ethnicity. There's one last map that I want to quickly show you, and that is on our homeownership topic area page at the local level. So this map, just waiting for it to load. This map allows you to explore the relationship between areas of Black homeownership and their social vulnerability to disasters. The Social Vulnerability Index is a score created by the CDC. That's an indicator of how each county in the United States can withstand climate, infrastructure, or environmental shocks. And the score has a range of 0 to 1. So a higher score indicates that a county is less able to respond to hazardous events, and so more vulnerable to environmental and infrastructure shocks. And this map, again, can be interacted with just like the other ones I showed you. And this also has a unique feature with the scatter plot on the right, where the x-axis is the social vulnerability index that goes from low to high, from left to right, and then percent Black owner-occupied housing units from low to high again. And one thing that's interesting, if we look at counties, for example, with around 40% Black owner-occupied housing or higher, you can see that they are really clustered on the top right quadrant with high social vulnerability. Another feature with all of the dashboards on our site is that they are able to be downloaded. You can just click this down arrow button, and that will allow you to download any of the images, either in an image format or a PDF format. So the very last thing I want to show you in this demo now, and again, there are tons of data at the national, state, and local level available on any of these topic pages here. But the last thing I want to show you is our new Black Wealth Indicators tool that's under the Explore Data header on our site. So this new feature brings together 4 unique data sets at the county level across all of our topic areas to give you one intersectional view of Black wealth, thinking again about when Natalie and Lamar talked about a more holistic understanding of Black wealth. And so here what we can do is enter one county. So for example, I'll do Wayne County, Michigan, that contains the city of Detroit. You can just enter one county and compare it with national level statistics, or you can enter a second county, which I will do here, Fulton County, Georgia, that contains the city of Atlanta, and click Generate Graph. And so what this does is shows us here at the top are a couple context variables for Wayne County in green and Fulton County in brown, just to give you some background on these counties before we dig into Black wealth indicators. And so, for example, the median home value for the county overall is much higher in Fulton County than Wayne County. The social vulnerability, though, is much higher in Wayne County than Fulton County. And then when we scroll down, we start to see a collection of Black wealth indicators that can be compared between the two counties. So for example, the median income for Black households is higher in Fulton County than Wayne County. Another interesting metric here is bachelor's degree attainment for Black individuals. It's nearly double that in Fulton County than it is in Wayne County. And so again, this collection of Black wealth indicators is to give you a one quick, easy view of a lot of different metrics relating to Black wealth that you can take away, and you can download any of these visuals individually to use in a report or share as an infographic. And then another great feature at the bottom is that you can download all the visuals here into one PDF to share with a coworker or reference later. So I know that's a lot. That's all I'm going to cover for today, but I definitely encourage all of you to explore the dashboards on our site, play with the data, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. We do have office hours available for sign up on our site, where you can just chat with us about a specific question you have. Or if you need help working with any of the visuals, and we will also continue to demo new features in our monthly webinars. So now I will pass it back to Natalie.
Thank you, Ami, and stay on camera for a little bit. Oh, keep sharing your screen and stay on camera for a little bit, because I think some of these questions are going to have you going to different parts of the site.
Cool.
The first question that has come in, first, thank you for the demo. The first question that has come in from the audience is, what is included in the median assets on your site? Does that include salaries, home, investments, etc.? So I think this is a good opportunity just to show the assets and debts, and we can show you exactly what we present on the site.
Yes. So I don't have the question pulled up that the, let me go down again to this. So the map that I showed earlier was from the survey of program and participation. I don't have the specific question they asked about assets, but what I can tell you, it is similar to when I scroll up to the survey of consumer finance, which is seen as the gold standard of wealth data. Oh, can you still see my screen?
No.
Oh, I just got the prompt again. Let me do this again. Assets and debt. Okay, I think
There we go.
we're good. Perfect.
Yep.
Okay, so sorry, I am on the assets and debt page again. This time on the national, and so the types of categories that are included when we say asset are some of the examples shown here. So directly held bonds, stocks, retirement accounts. Basically, the survey of program and participation asks a question about whether people have these like similar types of assets, and then aggregates them to the overall median level of assets.
Thank you. So the next question is, did you complete the consolidation of data from all the various sources into the racial wealth equity database, or is this still ongoing? So I'll answer a little, and then Ami can tell you how it is always ongoing. It is our lifeblood. So the racial wealth equity database currently has 14 data sets that are presented through our Explore data pages. And then we have another X number of data sets that we haven't even fully presented yet. We are always looking for additional data sets, and we are always looking at ways to continue to enhance the existing visualization. So for instance, Census put out their 2021 American Community Survey at the end of last year. That will be uploaded. We are in the process of cleaning and preparing that for sharing out through our visualizations in the coming month. So what you can anticipate from us is that the data we have will always be the latest versions of the data, and we are always looking to update and provide additional data sets, as well as update the quality of existing data sets. Currently, all the data sets we have in the repository are federal open data sets. We are in the future looking at private data sets that can add to the conversation, as well as ways to work with local communities and get their data. For instance, Ami highlighted at the beginning of the demo that we have 13 states that we don't have data from related to assets and debts. So how do we work with those states and those communities to get that data so they can be a part of the conversation and full understanding around racial wealth equity in that space? Anything else to add, Ami?
Nope. I think that sounds great, and I really think the more that we develop tools like the Black Wealth Indicators tools, we're constantly looking ways to really bring together the data sets at the same geographic level, so we can give people the best intersectional view of Black wealth.
Great. And then the next question is, how did you decide on these metrics as the indicators of Black wealth? Are there other aspects you considered for inclusion?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the ones that we start with, we did survey a group of like kitchen cabinet researchers that helped us, were thought partners with us in the creation of the Black Wealth Data Center. And we looked at what do we think are some of the indicators that are large drivers of Black wealth, to pick out the first set. And we are looking to like continue to add to that. Some things we considered that we didn't have data on the time is also, things related to social determinants of health, to climate. I think the list that we initially put forward is not meant to say like these are the only things that are important to Black wealth. They're meant to be a good foundation and jumping off point for your further exploration. And if there are things that you think are fundamental that are missing and that we have in our database or that we can bring in, please definitely let us know.
Yep. So just to reiterate, the Black Wealth Indicators tool is an initial version. So what we call a minimum viable product, an MVP. And it's based on the data that we have across our wealth topics. So we did rely on and collaborate with other experts in the space to make sure that we weren't creating unintentional consequences with the creation of the indicator and these indicators specifically. And we are always looking to work with the community to continue to evolve this. It will continue to iterate as we learn more and as we as a community learn more around how do we want to measure wealth at the community level. So, because this is what AMI did for the last year, how did you consolidate data that has been collected using different methods?
That's a great question. I think a lot of the ways in which we show data points together is by simply aggregating at the same geographic level. So we may not necessarily be like, adding ACS data and survey of consumer finance data together, but simply finding ways to display them together on the same visualization in ways that help you like make linkages across data sets. And that's something that we're going to be continuing to hope to do at the zip code level, at more granular levels, and finding ways, like for example, like the SBA does not require reporting, the Small Business Association doesn't require reporting on ethnicity and race for their business loans. And so we are able to show in that graphic that I'll show really quick, we are able to show ACS data at the county level. Sorry, it's loading slowly, but it's ACS data at the county level on like Black population percentage and median income, along with SBA data on the loan amounts given at that county or state level. So not necessarily like actually adding together the values, but just finding ways to display them to make like the best connections between the two data sets and add value to both.
Awesome, thank you. And does this include citizenship, for example, undocumented communities versus US citizens? So I'll reiterate, we're an aggregator, not a collector. So if our data sources, primarily from census, do not collect based upon status, then we can't present that data because we present based upon the original source. So I would say I don't think any of our data sets that are in there actually have that information. And that really ties to the ethnicity question as well. If it's not collected, then we can't present it as a part of the conversation through our site. And then I think this will be the last question. What unique variables or cross-references are available in your tool that are not available in other tools such as Policy Map? So I'll kick it off and then you can follow up with a response. So what I will say is that when you're thinking about other tools and our tool, it's not really a versus. It's really more of an additional. So Policy Map is a great tool and they provide information on very specific things. We're really focused on racial wealth equity. And so we're presenting the data in a different way. Your screen is still sharing me. So we present the information in a different way, and ideally you see overlaps across the data and information that Policy Map has in their tool and what's in our tool. So I would say you want to cross-reference across these tools and others. Opportunity Atlas is another great tool to use, and it should be a part of your toolbox of learning and providing information on these. Ami, I don't know if you want to speak specifically to unique variables, if you have that off the top of your head.
I don't have that off the top of my head, but yeah, I would just reiterate, I think we also are really paying attention to how can we best show data for Black households, Black individuals in particular, and highlighting the relationship between Black households and the metrics of interest. And so I think just thinking what are the ways in which we highlight or shade information or show correlations between certain variables. That like framework and lens is really what our visualizations and our data center is supposed to be about.
Yeah, and we bring in a comprehensive set of data sets in order to be able to do that. Whereas I think many of the tools that are out there focus on one or two data sets to tell a specific story. So thank you so much for the questions. For the ones that we didn't get to, if we can follow up, we will. We are accessible. You can reach us at info@blackwealthcenter.org. Thank you. Thank you so much for the great questions. Thank you, Lamar, for the great conversation. And I hope you enjoyed this webinar as much as we have presenting it to you. My closing thoughts, use the data. We're only here to make sure that you have what you need to tell your stories. So if the data is not being used, then what are we doing here? So please use the data, look up your counties or your zip codes, download the visualizations, share it on social media, start a conversation, and then tell us and invite us. We always want to learn and we always want to understand and we always want to be a part of this so we can make sure we're a resource for you. And if you want to dive deeper than what was presented on this demo, use our office hours. Sign up for office hours, continue to participate in webinars. We have a regular newsletter that you can sign up for to hear about our work and as we update data and visualizations and the work that we're doing as a center. Stay tuned. Site updates are coming very soon in the coming month, and we're excited for the things that we're going to be presenting for you to allow you to access and save data much more easily. Also, please don't forget before you log off to participate in the survey because we would love to get your feedback as we continue to work on these presentations. I'll now turn it over to Olivia. Thank you again.
Yeah, just to echo Natalie, thank you for joining us. You will receive the recording within a week from today, as well as the slides. And we want you to keep in touch with everyone on the line. So have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.